You are listening to a History of War audio documentary. For the best experience, use headphones. And if you want to march with us into the battles of the past, subscribe now. Now, let us step into the shadows of the past. Silence, a battlefield drowned in smoke and screams. They called him Johann of Luxembourg, King of Bohemia, but history remembers him by another name, the Blind King. In the summer of 1346, on the fields near the village of Crécy, he sat astride his horse. He could not see the banners. He could not see the arrows raining down from the English sky. He had not seen the faces of men in many years, yet his voice was steady. Tie my reins to yours and lead me into battle, for it is unworthy of a king to flee. So the knights bound his horse to theirs, and together they rode forward, into the storm of steel, into the hail of arrows, into the fire of history. When the battle was over, they found him lying in the mud, his body pierced, his crown broken, his name forever etched into legend. This is the story of the Blind King, not a tale of pity, but of fire, of darkness, of a ruler who lost his sight, and yet saw further than most men ever could. The boy was born in 1296 in the House of Luxembourg, a child of power, a son of destiny. His father, Heinrich VII, would rise to be Holy Roman Emperor. His mother, Margaret of Brabant, came from proud Flemish blood. But the boy's name, Johann, would outgrow them all. At the age of 14, fate placed upon his brow a crown. The crown of Bohemia, a kingdom not his by birth, but his by marriage, by politics, by ambition. A foreign boy king in a restless land. The Czech nobles eyed him with suspicion. They whispered, "He is young. He is weak. He does not belong." Yet Johann was not weak. He was forged in fire. Where others ruled from thrones, he ruled from the saddle. He rode, he fought, he bled. He carried the sword more often than the scepter. Prague was his capital, but the world was his battlefield. He rode to Italy, to Poland, to Hungary. His banners flew at sieges and tournaments, in forests, on plains, wherever men sought glory and kings sought dominion. And with every year, the boy king became a knight of Christendom. But his crown burned hot upon his brow. The nobles of Bohemia rebelled, resenting his foreign ways, his endless campaigns abroad. They saw him as absent, a stranger who wore their crown but lived in other lands. Johann answered not with compromise, but with the sword. He fought his own lords, his own people, to hold the kingdom that destiny had thrown into his hands. And though they feared him, they never loved him. Johann of Luxembourg remained a king of iron and flame, not of gentle peace. Yet beyond politics, there was the man himself. Tall, strong, restless, he was drawn not to councils and parchment, but to the thunder of hooves, the clash of steel. He was not a king of books, he was a king of war. And war would shape him, would lift him to glory and drive him into darkness. For in those early years, the first whispers of fate already stirred. Johann's eyes, so sharp in battle, so bright in youth, began to fail him. At first he dismissed it, a blur on the horizon, a shadow where there should be light. But the shadow grew, and though he fought it with iron will, The fire that blazed inside him would one day be forced to burn without sight. Thus begins the story of a boy who wore a crown of fire, a king who chose the path of the sword, and a man whose destiny was to ride blind into battle and into legend. He was called a king, but Johann of Luxembourg was more than that. He was a knight, perhaps the last true knight of Christendom, not a ruler bound to throne and parchment, but a rider of endless roads, a wanderer across the battlefields of Europe. From the Baltic forest to the burning plains of Italy, his horse carried him where others would not go. He fought not only for crowns, but for glory, for honor, for the song of his own legend. Chroniclers wrote of him in awe. Wherever there was strife, there was the King of Bohemia. Not in Prague, his capital, but in tournaments, crusades, and foreign wars. He rode against the Lithuanians in the frozen north, marching with the Teutonic Knights, where pagan fire met Christian steel. The chronicles tell of battles in forests black with snow, where Johann's banner cut through the darkness, a king among warriors. He fought in Italy where emperors clashed with popes, where cities burned and crowns were bought with blood. There too the blind king, still sighted then, left his mark upon the earth. And always in every place, Johann sought not gold nor peace, but the eternal echo of battle. He was a knight errant, a wandering monarch, a paradox, a king who was never home, yet whose name thundered across all Europe. The people of Bohemia grew restless. "Our king is not our king," they murmured. "He is a knight for other lands." And indeed, Johann's throne stood often empty, but his reputation, that burned like fire. In France they welcomed him. In Italy they feared him. In Germany they envied him. Even the English whispered his name, a knight who seemed to fight everywhere, for everyone and for no one but himself. Yet all fire consumes itself, and in the midst of his victories the shadows grew. Johann's eyes betrayed him. At first it was only in the night, a dimming of the stars, a hesitation at the edge of the tournament lists. But soon it spread into the day. The light fractured, shapes blurred, faces became ghosts. A knight whose life was vision, the arc of the lance, the flight of the arrow, the gleam of the enemy's blade, found himself fighting a war against the darkness within. Still, Johann refused surrender. If he could not see, he would ride harder. If the world dimmed, he would burn brighter. They called him reckless. They called him mad. But the chronicles tell of a king who refused to fade. Even as blindness crept over him, he fought at Crécy's forerunners. Smaller battles, lesser fields, proving again and again that a king of steel does not need eyes to command respect. In every camp, at every fire, the stories grew. Of a king who could not see, yet struck with unerring aim. Of a knight who wandered Europe, a figure more myth than flesh. They whispered, perhaps he does not need sight. Perhaps he rides guided by destiny itself. But destiny is cruel. The knight of Christendom, the restless king, was being led step by step toward a single field, a single day, where his blindness and his fire would meet their end. A king is meant to see, to look upon his land, to gaze into the eyes of his enemies, to measure allies and traitors alike. But Johann of Luxembourg saw nothing. The fire of his youth, once bright, was now drowned in darkness. It began with a haze, a blurring of banners at a distance, the tilt of a lance half a heartbeat too late, a shadow where light should be. Physicians muttered of sickness, of cataracts, of humors gone astray. But no cure came, no salve, no prayer, no miracle. The shadows crept further until they consumed the world entire. And by the 1340s, the King of Bohemia was blind. Yet he did not retreat into silence. No cloister, no darkened chamber, no surrender. Johann chose the path of iron. He still mounted his horse. He still rode with his knights, guided by squires, by comrades, by sheer defiance. Where other kings would have yielded to fate, Johann fought it, and in doing so he became more legend than man. The nobles of Bohemia whispered, "Our king cannot see. How can he rule?" They resented him, resented his absence, his foreign ways, his endless wars fought far from Prague. Johann's answer was not tender, it was not gentle, it was not compromise. His answer was the clash of armor, the steel of knights at his command. The kingdom remained restless, but Johann held it not with sight, but with fear, with force, and with the aura of a ruler who seemed unbreakable. And in the shadows a new figure rose beside him, his son, Charles, a youth who would one day be crowned as Charles IV, one of the greatest emperors of the Middle Ages. Father and son, bound by blood, divided by power. Charles was the future, educated, pragmatic, shrewd. Johann was the past, fiery, reckless, blind. And between them lay Bohemia, a kingdom caught between light and shadow. But Johann cared little for thrones and parchments. His blindness freed him from the petty struggles of court. He saw only one thing, the path of the knight, the call of battle. If he could not rule as other kings ruled, he would rule as none before him, a sovereign whose will was iron, whose eyes were gone, but whose legend burned all the brighter. To his enemies he was a phantom. How could a blind king still strike? How could he still lead armies into fire? To his allies he was both burden and blessing, a ruler who brought prestige, but also chaos. Yet in the whispers of Europe, Johann was something greater. He was myth, and myth is stronger than flesh. Myth does not need eyes. Myth sees beyond the world of men. Thus the blind king ruled a kingdom of shadows, a realm where he walked sightless but unafraid, where every step was guided not by vision but by will, a king, a knight, a shadow given crown and sword. Soon the 100 Years' War would call to him, and the blind king, who could not see his own banners, would march into a conflict that would carve his name into eternity. The year was 1337. A storm broke across Europe, a storm of banners, of crowns of iron. They called it the 100 Years' War, though no man alive at its dawn could imagine it would last for generations. France against England, Capetian pride against Plantagenet ambition, a struggle not only for thrones, but for the soul of Christendom itself. Into this storm rode Johann of Luxembourg, blind, unyielding, drawn not by duty to his own lands, but by the ancient bond between Bohemia and France. For Johann was more than a king. He was family to the French crown. His daughter Bonnie had wed the heir of France. His blood flowed in the veins of princes who would one day rule that kingdom. And so when France called, Johann answered. Imagine the field, the thunder of hooves, the clash of armor, and among them, a king who could not see the banners, yet knew by heart the rhythm of war. Guided by squires, he entered the fray. His blindness mattered little, for he fought by instinct, by the memory of steel, by the will that refused to break. In councils he was a symbol, a blind monarch, yet fearless, a relic of an older age, when knights rode not for profit, but for honor. French nobles, weary and divided, looked upon him and felt shame. If a blind king still rides to battle, what excuse have we? Thus Johann became more than an ally. He was an inspiration, a reminder of what chivalry once meant. But destiny sharpened its blade. The English had changed the art of war. They no longer fought as knights upon the field, but as archers behind walls of stakes. Their longbows bent the sky, and with every arrow, the age of knighthood bled. Johann, blind and proud, rode straight into this new world, a world where the sword was less than the bow, where honor was drowned in distance. And yet he did not hesitate. He could not see the arrows, but he felt their storm. He could not see the enemy, but he knew they were there. Chroniclers wrote of him, "The blind king of Bohemia fought as though his eyes were open. He sought not victory, but glory, not survival, but immortality." And as the war deepened, as France staggered under defeat after defeat, one truth became clear. The stage was being set. The fire was being stoked. For Johann's destiny would not be written in treaties or councils, but in one battle, one day, one charge into the mouth of death itself. The war stretched, and the blind king waited. He had crossed Europe in search of glory all his life. Now glory was coming to him. It had a name. Crécy, year 1346, a field in northern France, where the blind king would ride for the last time. The summer sun burned over northern France. August, the year of our Lord 1346. Fields of wheat stood trampled beneath the boots of armies. The dust of thousands of men and horses choked the air. Here, near the village of Crécy, two worlds prepared to collide. On one side, King Philip of France, with his knights, his banners, his pride. On the other, Edward of England, with his longbowmen, his discipline, his new art of war. And among the French host, a blind king, Johann of Luxembourg. The French knights were restless. They wanted glory, revenge, triumph. They saw the English lines, their archers massed behind sharpened stakes, their banners steady in the wind. The wiser men counseled caution, but pride is a sharper spur than reason, and pride ruled that day. The trumpets blared, the banners fell forward, and France hurled itself against England. The sky darkened, not with storm cloud, but with arrows. The English longbows bent like serpents and spat death across the field. The first French charge broke upon them like waves against cliffs. Horses screamed, knights fell, the ground turned slick with blood. Yet still they pressed forward. Still they hurled themselves into the storm. And at the rear, Johann of Luxembourg waited, blind, listening to the cries of men, the clash of iron, the whistle of arrows in the air. He asked what the banters showed. They told him, "The French falter, my lord." The English hold. Johann was silent. Then he spoke words that would echo through centuries. "Sirs, you are my men, my friends, my companions. Today I beg you, lead me into battle, for it is unworthy of a king to flee." His knights hesitated. Their lord was blind. The field was chaos. Death waited in every shadow. But Johann's command was iron. "Tie my reins to yours. Bind me to you. We shall ride together. So they obeyed. They fastened his horse to theirs, so that when they charged, he would charge with them, not behind, not apart, but as their king, as their equal. The moment came, trumpets screamed, the earth shook, and the blind king of Bohemia rode into battle. He could not see the storm of arrows, but he felt them thud against shield and flesh. He could not see the English line, but he knew it was there, a wall of death waiting. Yet he rode straight, unflinching, his sword raised. Those who watched said it was as though a ghost charged with the living, a man already half in the realm of shadows, riding to claim his place among the dead. They broke into the English line. Steel clashed. Johann's sword struck true. Even blind, his blows carried the weight of a lifetime of war. For a moment the tide seemed to shift. For a moment it seemed the blind king might carve glory from the jaws of doom. But arrows fell without end. The English ranks held. The French knights shattered. Johann's horse stumbled. His companions fell around him. And in the mud of Crécy, amid screams and smoke, the blind king met his fate. When the battle ended, the French were broken. The field was a graveyard, and among the fallen they found Johann, his body pierced, his crown shattered, his hand still gripping the sword. The chroniclers wrote, "Here lies the King of Bohemia, who chose death over dishonor, darkness over retreat, and in blindness saw more than all others." The blind king was gone, but legend remained, a king who rode into battle without eyes, yet with more vision than the men who followed him, a king who proved that honor, though it cannot shield from arrows, can outlast death itself. Crécy was not his defeat, it was his triumph. For in that field of mud and blood, Johann of Luxembourg became immortal. The field of Crécy was silent. The cries of men, the thunder of hooves, the hiss of arrows, all had faded. Only the crows remained, circling above the corpses of kings and peasants alike. Among them lay Johann of Luxembourg, the blind king, the rider who had chosen death over retreat. News of his fall spread swiftly across Europe. To the French he was a martyr of chivalry, a beacon in their darkest hour. To the English he was an enemy, but one they could not help but honor. Even Edward of England, the victor of Crécy, is said to have bowed his head in respect. For all men knew they had witnessed the passing of an age. The age of knights, the age of honor, was dying in the storm of arrows. But Johann's death gave that age its final blaze of glory. In Bohemia, the throne did not fall with him. His son Charles IV inherited the crown, a son more careful, more shrewd, more enduring. Charles would guide Bohemia to greatness, to Prague's golden age, to the heights of empire. But always behind him stood the shadow of his father, the blind king who had lived not for thrones but for battle, not for peace but for legend. The chroniclers wrote of Johann with awe. He was the flower of chivalry, a knight who feared nothing, not even the darkness that took his sight. They remembered the moment he spoke his final words, "Lead me into battle, for it is unworthy of a king to flee." In those words, the essence of knighthood was sealed, not victory, not survival, but honor. And so Johann passed into myth, the blind king, a ruler who saw nothing, yet more than all others. His blindness became his crown, his death became his triumph, His story became eternal. Even now, centuries later, his ghost rides across the memory of Europe, a shadow in armor, a king without eyes leading his knights into fire. He does not belong to Bohemia alone, nor to France, nor to the Middle Ages. He belongs to the eternal realm of legend. The age of knights ended at Crécy, but with it, the blind king was born into immortality. And so the story closes, with a man who could not see, yet whose vision outlived empires. The blind king, Johann of Luxembourg, forever bound to the field of Crécy, forever remembered as the last great knight of Christendom. If this story has moved you, stand with us in keeping history alive. Subscribe to History of War, like this video to spread the flame, and share your thoughts in the comments below. For history is not gone, it waits to be seen, even by those without eyes.